Thanks so much for joining us. We are the Massie Twins from GoneWithTheTwins.com. And today we'll be doing a review on Donnie Darko. And the reason for this is it's not terribly relevant, but Jake Gyllenhaal is going to appear in the new Spider-Man film. So we thought, let's go back and see one of his very early roles.
In fact, this is the kind of the movie that put him on the map.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about this, so it came out in 2001, and it wasn't a real big hit. It didn't play in a whole lot of theaters. But around 2002, it came out on DVD and it started gaining a cult following. And that's the first time we saw it was in 2002. And I remember liking the atmosphere, the tone, the mood, the characters, but I didn't understand it. And ultimately, when I don't fully understand a film, I tend to fault the director on that. His vision wasn't clear. And so it wasn't, I didn't quite see what all the buzz was about. So I thought, we thought revisiting this, maybe, all these years later, 18 years later or 17 years later, maybe our opinions would change. Maybe I'd see something that I didn't see in it before.
But
now,
the thing is, we watched the theatrical cut again.
And again, this is because I think in a large way, our philosophy. I like seeing the theatrical cut because that's the version that audiences got to see at the time. The director's cut, producers cut, all that kind of stuff. Those are kind of like redos. Those are the filmmakers saying, wait a minute, my movie wasn't quite good enough, so let me redo it, and what do you think of this? And I don't like that second chance idea, but anyway, everybody's got different philosophies on
with this movie, though, that the director's cut does add so much more into it, that it does explain the things that you wouldn't normally get.
The director's cut, you're looking at like 20, 30 minutes of additional footage, so I'm sure it does get a lot more cohesive. But we chose the theatrical version because I wanted to see again what audiences saw back in 2001. So what this one starts with Jake Gyllenhaal really young, and Maggie Gyllenhaal is also in here playing his slightly older sister. And he's been daydreaming, sleepwalking, and he kind of awakes in the middle of the road as if he's been hit by a car or something. But in fact, it's just the
whole movie has a very dreamlike quality to it.
Yeah,
especially the beginning of the film. It is very difficult to tell what's real and what's not, and they do that on purpose. But essentially, he sees this kind of this vision of Frank, who is this kind of evil-looking person dressed in a rabbit suit. But it's like a Halloween costume rabbit suit. But so Frank ends up early in the film, he lures him outside by talking to him, and by doing this, he avoids getting killed by a giant airplane engine falling through the roof of his house, and that's kind of the start of this even weirder journey into essentially what is a tangent timeline.
So it's interesting. It's a mystery to a large degree, this beginning of it, and
they really don't give you any clues at all about what's really going on.
And I think the beginning of it, they try to develop characters. They try to create relationships between the different characters. I didn't buy a lot of the adult characters. I liked Jake Gyllenhaal. I liked Maggie Gyllenhaal. They felt authentic, probably because they're a real brother-sister. They've got a bit of a chemistry.
Everyone in this film acts very strangely.
Yes.
Especially the adults. Nobody acts like they would in that.
I really didn't like the father. He seemed the most artificial of all of them. But I did like Mary McDonnell, who plays their mother. Mm-hmm. She was the only adult character in here that I thought this is a little bit more authentic.
I liked Drew Barrymore, even though her character is very bizarre and it's strange, and she doesn't act really the way that any professional teacher would.
So this is written and directed by Richard Kelly, who he's kind of I wouldn't liken him to David Lynch so much, but I feel like he's trying to emulate some of what David Lynch does, which is just this great merger between reality and fantasy. And here he strings you along, and you never quite know, is this all happening? What's not happening? And because of this apparition of Frank the Bunny, you get a sense of sometimes the reality has merged with the fantasy, and other times it hasn't.
Frank the Bunny basically tells Donnie Darko that the world is going to end in so many days and hours and minutes, and so you kind of get this pervasive sense of dread throughout the whole film because it's counting down to something.
Yes,
and maybe it's the end of the world, maybe it's not. Who knows how reliable Frank is as a
and what's unusual for the world is ending sort of plot is this is kind of it's almost like a dark John Hughes sort of an atmosphere, because it's high school drama, it's high school romance, it's the high school shenanigans. There's pranks going on. There's rivalry.
It feels very much like a parable for high school life, or someone who can't fit in, as struggles,
adolescence getting out of hand, and
because it deals with the budding romance and getting bullied and all those kind of things.
And Donnie Darko is he has emotional disorders.
Yes, he goes to a therapist.
So, but again, there's so little given to us throughout the film to clue us in on what's and even when you reach the revelation, there's still fewer answers.
Still difficult to...
For me, despite the more than a decade later, this movie still has just enough holes in it that it just didn't work for me.
For me, I find this movie really fascinating. I really enjoy a huge chunk of the different aspects of the film. I enjoy the actors. I enjoy the acting. The dialogue, a lot of it is really strange and bizarre, and there's a lot of interesting humor as well, because they have this strange conversations about his initial conversation with the girlfriend Jenna Malone is pretty quirky and awkward and funny. They have random, his conversations with his therapist are vulgar and abrasive and interesting, and even they have a small aside of talking about the sexual relations in the Smurf community and things like that. So a lot of really weird, bizarre conversations. So I like all of that, and I like how dreamlike the whole film is, and it kind of, but essentially at the end you do realize they haven't given you enough to fully understand. And I think if those have watched the director's cut and those who have read online, going back, you can kind of think, oh, I get it now. But this is such an interesting movie to me, because it's one of those films that, unless you know what Richard Kelly is doing early on, you're never. It's almost impossible to fully comprehend this film.
And that's actually the reason why I don't like it, because again, to me, I feel like the director needs to give us enough information that we can follow along, even if it's and I like the obscurity of certain things. I like not knowing all the answers. But again, if it's just too arcane, then it loses me.
I think it's so interesting, because it fits in between the place of things like, so on one end of the spectrum you have movies like Eraserhead that it doesn't make it, it's nonsensical, or perhaps the conclusion to 2001: A Space Odyssey. You can watch it a million times, you can take what you will from it, but essentially it doesn't make sense.
It's open to interpretation.
Exactly, it's open to... Now, and then on the other end of the spectrum of these kind of movies that play with your mind and you don't know what's what's real and what's not, you've got things like Enemy, which is another Jake Gyllenhaal film, or Mulholland Drive. And these films, the first time you watch them, you're almost certainly not going to know what happens, or what has progressed in the story. But the more times you watch it, it is feasible you could get pretty much everything the director's trying to say.
There's essentially a right and wrong answer.
And Donnie Darko falls somewhere in between those spectrums, because there is a right answer, and there is something that Richard Kelly's trying to say with this movie. The problem is, if you don't know his view on time travel and what his concept is of a tangent universe and a tangent timeline, and he doesn't tell you these things. No. He does in the director's cut a little bit, but if you don't know these things going into the movie, you will not understand what the ending is about, what the movie means. I mean, you can pull from it what you will as far as,
and I can walk away from this being amused by the characters, laughing a bit at the dialogue, enjoying the atmosphere, the character design. Frank the Bunny has become now an iconic sort of an image. But again, those are all elements that don't come together for a cohesive whole, and that's where it loses me.
This is one of those films, though, you can keep revisiting, and you'll get a little more out of it each time. I think it does hurt it that, without knowing what Richard Kelly, his stance on time travel and what his essentially the elements that he's put into the story about a tangent timeline, without knowing those things, it's something that it's very difficult to comprehend. And another thing too is, if you read about what his vision is, and they reference this book, Graham Greene's Destructors and things like that. Going further, doing a little research and finding out about these things, it makes the movie more interesting. But nobody had that access to those kind of things in the initial viewing, so it's a bit unfair to maybe judge how interesting the movie is by doing extra research.
It is a conundrum that this became such a cult classic when arguably very few people understood it, which means that they latched onto the same things that we liked, which were the characters and the design,
dialogue,
the atmosphere,
kind of a little bit of a gothic horror mixed into this very dreamy film.
But presumably nobody came out of this saying, "Oh, I got that 100%."
Well, certainly people came out of it saying, "Oh, I understood that fully."
Yeah, but did they? It's hard to say. Yeah. Anyway, so online you can read our spoiler-free review where we'll give a score. Here we won't give the score, so you'll have to check us out online at gonewiththetwins.com.
All right, well, that about wraps things up. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll be back with another movie review before you know it.